He faked being poor for 10 years, and no one ever suspected the truth. Not his family, not his enemies, not even the woman who spent a decade humiliating him for it. They called him the fallen heir, the disgraced son who lost everything and now scraped by on charity dinners and secondhand suits. They laughed behind his back, and sometimes right to his face. "Look at him," they'd whisper, "still pretending he matters." What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that every torn jacket, every borrowed car, every skipped meal in public was a choice, a weapon he sharpened in silence for exactly one night. Tonight was that night. The charity auction hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, every seat filled with the city's wealthiest. Men in tailored suits, women dripping in jewels bought to be seen, not worn. Waiters moved between tables with champagne no one was really drinking. Everyone was too busy watching each other. And at the center of it all, her, Sheng Qing. The woman who built her empire on his humiliation. The woman who 10 years ago stood in front of everyone he knew and called him a coward, a fraud, a man who couldn't even afford his own dignity. Tonight, she didn't know he was in the room. He sat near the back in a jacket that looked 2 seasons old, hands folded, face unreadable. To anyone watching, he was just another guest killing time before the real bidding began. But he wasn't here to bid. Not at first. He was here to watch her make the mistake that would end her. The auctioneer's voice rang out, sharp and theatrical, introducing the next lot, a rare pair of Celadon porcelain vases, donated anonymously that very morning. Rumored to be tied to royal kilns. Priceless, the auctioneer claimed, and beautiful enough that the whole room seemed to lean forward at once. What none of them knew was that he had donated those vases himself. He'd bought them for 5 million yuan from a private overseas sale, and tonight he planned to buy them back quietly, generously, and let the money vanish into the charity's accounts. No spectacle, no attention. That was the plan, until Sheng Qing decided to make it personal. "I'll open at 3.5 million, she said, her voice dripping with theatrical grace, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Her eyes swept past the crowd and landed on him. A slow, mocking smile spread across her face. "Some people," she said, not breaking eye contact, "come to these events and never lift a finger. Too afraid to spend a single yuan. I wonder why that is." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby tables. Heads turned toward him. He didn't flinch. He simply looked back at her, calm as still water. Let her talk. Let her laugh. Let her believe for just a little while longer that she was in control. Because in exactly 40 minutes, everything she thought she knew about him was going to shatter. And this time, there would be no fixing it. The auctioneer raised his gavel, eyes darting between the two of them, like he'd stumbled into something bigger than a simple bidding war. 3.5 million from Miss Shen, he announced. Do I hear 4? Silence. Then, from the back of the room, a calm voice. 4 million. Every head turned. He hadn't raised his hand. He hadn't even looked up. He simply said it, the way a man orders coffee. Sheng Qing's smile faltered for half a second, so brief most people missed it, but he didn't. She recovered fast, tilting her head, feigning surprise. Well, well, looks like our Golden Sands hotel owner still has a few coins left in his pocket. The room chuckled again. He said nothing. 4.5, she said, raising her paddle with a flick of her wrist, like she was swatting away an insect. 5, he answered,
voice flat. "Every time you only add 50,000, she said lightly, playing to the crowd now. "And you call yourself the owner of Golden Sands? People who don't know you would think a beggar wandered in, pretending to be rich." A few uncomfortable laughs. Someone near the front actually gasped. He didn't blink. 7,750,000. The number landed heavier than the others. The room went quiet for a beat too long. "Miss Shen," he said, voice level, almost gentle, "I'd advise you to stop here. Going further wouldn't be wise." She laughed, loud, confident, performing for every camera phone quietly filming from the tables around them. "Regret? Why would I regret it? I've built my own company from nothing. I don't cling to every yuan the way some people do." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp as glass. "If your pockets are empty, you don't have to compete with me. Save yourself the embarrassment." 8 million, she said. The whole hall stirred. Whispers rippled table to table. Someone near the stage murmured, That's insane for a pair of vases." He knew exactly how insane. Those vases weren't worth more than 6 million, maybe 6.5 on a generous day. He would know. He'd bought them himself for 5. But Sheng King didn't know that. And her pride was writing checks her calculations couldn't cash. He let a flicker of hesitation cross his face. A small, practiced falter, timed perfectly. "Miss Shen," he said slowly, like a man choosing his next words carefully. "Truthfully, there's no need to keep going. If you can't complete the payment in the end, it would only bring you embarrassment. 8.5. Let's end it here." The crowd ate it up. Whispers turned into open murmurs of admiration for her, pity for him. "What a generous woman," someone said. "The young man should just give up already." Shen Qing's chest rose with quiet triumph. She turned to the crowd, milking the moment. "If you don't have the money, just say so. I thought the owner of Golden Sands would be a man of real means." "I suppose I expected too much." 9 million, she said, loud and proud, chin lifted like a queen delivering a verdict. The auctioneer could barely contain himself. His voice cracked with theatrical emotion. "This young lady's bid is truly remarkable. Such generosity, such a giving spirit at such a young age. Astonishing." He turned to the room. "Now the question is, will this gentleman dare go haughtier?" He let his brow furrow, let his jaw tighten, just enough. The performance had to land exactly right. Somewhere near the stage, someone whispered, "Finally, looks like the pressure's getting to him." Another voice, quieter, almost reverent. "Maybe now we'll see who he really is." They had no idea, because in the next few seconds, everything they thought they understood about that night was about to fall apart. He rose slowly from his seat. No rush, no hesitation. Just the quiet, deliberate movement of a man who had been waiting years for this exact second. The room fell silent, watching him cross toward the aisle, every eye tracking his path like he was walking toward his own execution. He could feel their pity, their smugness, their certainty that he was about to fold. He let them believe it a little longer. He stopped a few feet from the stage, turned to face Sheng Qing directly, and gave a slow, respectful bow of his head, the kind you'd offer someone you genuinely admired. "Miss Shen," he said, voice carrying easily across the silent hall, "your generosity tonight is truly admirable. Your dedication to charity, it moves me, honestly." A few people exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the collapse they'd been expecting. "So let me be honest with you," he continued. "Tonight's final item, the Celadon vases everyone's been fighting over, I donated them myself this morning."
I bought
bought them overseas for 5 million yuan. The room shifted. Whispers exploded from every table at once. My plan, he continued calmly, was simple. Buy them back tonight, quietly, and let the extra money go straight to the charity. No spectacle, no scene. He glanced at her, almost fondly. But you kept raising the price, Miss Shen. And now, I understand. You must truly love this pair of vases. Shen Xing's smile was still frozen on her face, but something behind her eyes had started to crack.
So, he said, softer now, I won't take them from you. The vases are yours, Miss Shen. Congratulations. The color drained from her face in real time. Her mouth opened, then closed. Opened again. That's not, she stammered, voice cracking for the first time all night. How is this possible? This can't be happening to me. She looked down at her own paddle like it had betrayed her.
I've been made a fool, she whispered. A complete fool. Even if I sold my entire company right now, I still couldn't cover this. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but this time they weren't laughing at him. Somewhere near the front, a man in a gray suit leaned toward his companion. Wait, he donated those vases, and he still let her win the bid? He just handed her a 9 million yuan bill, another voice muttered, without losing a single yuan himself.
That's not generosity. That's a masterclass. He allowed himself the faintest smile, not cruel, not gloating, just quiet, controlled satisfaction, the kind that comes from watching a plan click perfectly into place after 10 long years of preparation. Shen Qing's hands were trembling now. She turned toward the crowd, searching for support, for someone to rescue her from the humiliation closing in. But every face she found only looked away.
This isn't over, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. He simply nodded once, turned, and walked back toward his seat like nothing unusual had happened at all. But it was far from over, because Shen Qing was only the first domino. And the auction hall, full of people who'd spent 10 years underestimating him, was about to find out exactly how far his patience had run out. He returned to his seat, but the room didn't return to normal. Conversations buzzed low and fast, the kind of murmurs that ripple through a crowd right before something bigger happens. People kept glancing back at him, not with pity now, but with something closer to curiosity, maybe even caution. Good. Let them wonder. The auctioneer, sensing the shift in the room, cleared his throat and tried to steer things back on track.
Well, what a remarkable turn of events, truly.
Let's move to our closing remarks for tonight's charity gala. He was cut off by the sound of heels against marble. Shen Qing wasn't finished. She marched toward him, her earlier confidence replaced by something sharper, more desperate. Up close, he could see her hands were still shaking, though she was trying hard to hide it behind a tight, brittle smile. You planned this, she hissed, low enough that only those nearby could hear. You knew exactly what you were doing. I did, he said simply. No point denying it now. Her jaw tightened. 10 years, and you're still playing games. You think humiliating me in front of this crowd changes anything? You think it erases what happened back then? Something in his expression shifted. Not anger, but a kind of tired clarity.
This was never about erasing anything, he said quietly. I stopped trying to erase the past a long time ago, Miss Shen. Tonight wasn't revenge. Tonight was just math. You made an assumption about a man you never bothered to actually know. The auction simply corrected it. Her lips parted, but no response came. For the first time that night, Shen Qing looked less like a woman in control of the room and more like someone realizing, in real time, how badly she'd misjudged her opponent.
You'll regret this, she finally managed, though the thread had lost most of its weight. "Perhaps," he said, "but not tonight."
This is my fault?
She turned sharply and walked away, heels clicking a hurried rhythm against the marble floor, disappearing through the side doors as murmurs followed her exit. He exhaled slowly and sat back down, letting the noise of the room wash over him. Around him, people were still processing what they'd just witnessed, some impressed, some wary, a few already pulling out phones to call contacts, to ask questions, to figure out exactly who this man really was.
That was fine. Let them ask. Because tonight wasn't really about Shenqing at all. She was simply the loudest name on a much longer list. A list he'd been quietly building for 10 years, ever since the night his family turned their backs on him and called it for his own good. He remembered that night with perfect clarity. The cold dining room, his father's voice, flat and final. "You're an embarrassment. Until you prove otherwise, you're no son of mine." He'd smiled that night too, the same smile he wore now. Not because it didn't hurt, it had hurt more than anything. But because smiling was the only thing he could control. 10 years. 10 years of building Golden Sands from nothing, in the shadows, under names that weren't his own. While the world assumed he was exactly what they'd left him to become. A failure, a joke, a man who didn't matter. Tonight was the first crack in that illusion. It wouldn't be the last. Because somewhere across the city, in a penthouse office that still bore his family's name on the door, his father was about to get a phone call that would ruin his evening completely. The call came just after 11. His father, old Master Fu, was still awake in his study, reviewing quarterly reports under the soft glow of a desk lamp when his phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. He glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number, and almost let it ring out. Almost. He answered instead. "Hello?" "Sir?" The voice on the other end said, hurried, breathless. "You need to see what happened at the Rongshan Charity Gala tonight. It's already spreading online." "What are you talking about?" "The Golden Sands owner. He was there tonight. He donated the closing item himself, a pair of celadon vases, and let Shenqing bid herself into a 9 million yuan corner." In front of everyone.
What do you mean,
Old Master Fu's pen stopped moving. "Golden Sands," he repeated slowly, like the name itself tasted strange in his mouth. "Yes, sir.
What do you mean,
And, sir, there's something else. Someone in the crowd recognized him, not by his current name, by his real one."
What do you mean, compromise?
The room went very quiet. "Say that
What do you
again,"
mean,
Old Master Fu
compromise?
said, voice suddenly low. "They're saying it's your son, sir."
The one you disowned 10 years ago. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. For a long moment, old Master Fu said nothing at all. His eyes drifted to a framed photo on the corner of his desk, an old family portrait, slightly faded, of a boy no older than 17 standing stiffly beside his mother, trying to smile for the camera. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. He usually made a point not to. "Where is he now?" he finally asked. "Unknown, sir. He left the gala shortly after the auction ended. No one's been able to reach him."
What do you mean, compromise?
Old Master Fu set the phone down slowly, his jaw tightening. 10 years. 10 years of believing his son had crawled off somewhere to fail quietly, to disappear into irrelevance, the way he'd been engineered to. Instead, the boy had built an empire under everyone's nose and let the entire city believe he was nothing.
And tonight, in front of half the city's elite, he'd finally decided to stop hiding. Old Master Fu picked up the phone again, dialing a different number this time. His assistant, his lawyer, anyone who could get him real answers before the sun came up. Because if his son really was the man behind Golden Sands, then every decision made in this family over the last decade had just become a liability. And somewhere, deep beneath the anger and the shock, a smaller, quieter feeling stirred in his chest, one he hadn't let himself feel in years: regret. Across the city, in a modest apartment that no one from his old life would ever think to look for him in, he sat by the window with a single lamp on, a cup of tea slowly going cold in his hands. His phone had been buzzing for the last 20 minutes straight. He hadn't looked at it once. He didn't need to. He already knew what it said. Unknown numbers, old contacts resurfacing after a decade of silence, reporters, distant relatives who suddenly remembered his name. Funny how fast people rediscover you the moment you stop needing them. He set the tea down and finally picked up the phone, scrolling past the noise until he found the one message that actually mattered, from Old Fang, the only person from his past who'd never once turned his back on him.
It's done. The story's everywhere. Are you ready for what comes next? He typed back a short reply. I've been ready for 10 years. He set the phone face down on the table and let his mind drift back, not to tonight's auction, but further, to the beginning, to the version of himself that used to believe loyalty meant something in that family. He remembered standing in that same cold dining room, 17 years old, listening to his father's voice cut through him like it was nothing.
Until you prove otherwise, you're no son of mine. He remembered the silence that followed. No one at that table had said a word in his defense. Not his stepmother, not his half-siblings, no one. That night, he made himself a promise. He wouldn't beg. He wouldn't explain. He would simply disappear and come back only when the ground had shifted so far beneath their feet that they'd have no choice but to look up. 10 years later, the ground had finally shifted. Golden Sands hadn't started as a hotel empire. It started as a single failing property he'd bought under a borrowed name for almost nothing, using the small inheritance his late mother had left him, money his father never even knew existed. He rebuilt it floor by floor, deal by deal, letting the world believe he was still the same disgraced nobody from a decade ago. Every rejected loan, every closed door, every person who looked at him like he was already finished, he remembered every single one of them. And tonight was only the beginning of the reckoning. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. Dad. 2 letters. A single word. The first time in 10 years his father had tried to reach him directly. He stared at the screen for a long moment, thumb hovering over the decline button. Not yet, he thought. Let him wait. Let him feel, just for one night, a fraction of what waiting felt like. He set the phone down without answering and looked back out at the city lights, calm and unreadable, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Because his father wasn't the only person who was about to get a very uncomfortable phone call tonight. Shengqing's family business partners were next. Shengqing hadn't gone home after the auction. She'd gone straight to her office, still in her gown. Mascara smudged from wiping angry tears she refused to let anyone see fall in public. By the time she reached her desk, her phone had already exploded with messages. Business partners, investors, a board member asking, in painfully polite corporate language, whether the 9 million yuan bid had been a strategic donation or a personal miscalculation.
She threw the phone across the room.
It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Screen cracked down the middle. A fool, she whispered to herself, pacing. He made me look like a complete fool. A knock at the door interrupted her. Her assistant, May, stepped in carefully, like she was approaching a wounded animal. "Ma'am, the story's trending. Someone posted a video from the gala. It already has 500,000 views." "I don't want to hear it," Xing snapped.
May hesitated, then continued anyway. "There's something else. People are asking questions about who he actually is. Someone in the comments claims he's connected to the Fu family, the disowned son." Shen Qing froze mid-step. "The Fu family," she repeated slowly. "That collapsed years ago. Old Master Fu doesn't even have a son anymore, not one that matters." "That's the thing, ma'am," May said quietly. "People are saying he does."
And that he's been building Golden Sands this entire time, completely under the radar. Shang Qing sat down slowly, the anger in her chest curdling into something colder, calculation. If it was true, if the man who just publicly humiliated her really was connected to old Fu money and knew Golden Sands money, then tonight wasn't just an embarrassment. It was a warning shot.
"Get me everything you can find on Golden Sands' ownership structure," she said. "Shell companies, silent partners, anything. I want to know exactly who I'm dealing with before he decides to come after me directly." May nodded and hurried out. Alone again, Shen Qing stared at the shattered phone on the floor, her reflection faintly visible in one of the cracked shards. For the first time in years, she felt something she wasn't used to feeling.
Fear. Because men who play the long game rarely stop after one move. And if tonight was only the opening, she had no idea what the rest of the board looked like. Meanwhile, across town, another message was making its way through the Fu family group chat, one that would hit far closer to home than Shen Qing's collapsing business alliances. His stepmother had just seen the video.
Madame Fu sat frozen on the edge of her bed, phone screen glowing in the dark bedroom, replaying the video for the third time. There he was, older, sharper, standing in that auction hall with a calm she didn't recognize. Nothing like the quiet, withdrawing boy she remembered dismissing at every family dinner for years. Her stomach twisted. She'd never hated him, not really, but she'd never defended him either.
It had always been easier to stay silent, to let her husband's temper decide what happened to a son who wasn't hers by blood. Easier to protect her own children's inheritance by looking away. Now that silence had a price tag, and it was climbing higher by the hour. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from her daughter, his half-sister, Fu Xin. "Mom, is this real? Is that actually him? Golden Sands? That's worth more than half of what Dad owns." Madame Fu didn't answer right away. She didn't know how to. Down the hall, she could hear her husband's voice, low and tense, still on a call that had started nearly an hour ago. Every few minutes, his voice would rise, then drop again, like a man negotiating with a storm he couldn't control. She got up quietly and walked towards his study, standing just outside the door.
"I don't care what it costs," old Master Fu was saying. "I need confirmation before sunrise. If that boy really is behind Golden Sands, I need to know exactly how deep this goes before the market opens." A pause, then quieter, almost to himself. 10 years. 10 years, and he let us believe. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Madame Fu stepped back from the door, her hand pressed lightly against the wall to steady herself. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to remember the boy as he used to be. Quiet, careful, always the first to apologize, even when he'd done nothing wrong.
They'd mistaken his silence for weakness. All of them had. She returned to her room, sat back down, and finally typed a reply to her daughter. I don't know if it's real, but if it is, we should all be very careful about what we say about him from now on. She hesitated, then added one more line before sending it. And maybe we owe him more than an apology. Across town, in his quiet apartment, his phone buzzed one final time before midnight. Not from his father, not from Shang-Ching. A new number, one he hadn't seen in 10 years. His stepsister. He looked at the screen for a long moment before finally setting the phone down, unanswered. Not tonight. Tomorrow, the real conversations would begin, on his terms, at his pace, in rooms he controlled. Tonight, he simply wanted to sit in the quiet and let the city feel the weight of what it had just learned. Morning came fast. By 7 a.m., the video from the gala had crossed 2 million views. Business news outlets picked up the story before the sun had even fully risen. Mystery bidder exposes hidden fortune, one headline read. Another was blunter. Disowned heir resurfaces as silent owner of Golden Sands empire. He read the headlines over black coffee, unbothered, scrolling past them the way most people scroll past weather updates. His phone had over 40 missed calls by the time he finished his coffee. Business partners wanting meetings. Journalists wanting quotes. 2 banks that had rejected his loan applications a decade ago, now suddenly eager to reconnect. He almost laughed at that one. A knock at his door interrupted the quiet. He wasn't expecting anyone, which meant only one person would show up uninvited. He opened it to find Old Fang standing there, grinning, holding 2 cups of coffee like a peace offering. "You're famous," Old Fang said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Congratulations, or condolences. Haven't decided which yet." "Neither," he said, taking one of the coffees. "It's just Tuesday." Old Fang laughed, dropping onto the couch. "Your father's been trying to reach every lawyer in the city since midnight. Word is he's terrified you're about to make a move on Fu Holdings." "Am I?" he asked, voice neutral. "You tell me." "You're the one who spent 10 years quietly buying up debt tied to half his suppliers." He allowed himself a small, controlled smile. That wasn't about him. That was just good business. "Sure," Old Fang said, unconvinced. "Good business that happens to leave his entire supply chain one signature away from collapsing if you decide to call in those debts." He didn't respond right away. He walked to the window instead, looking out at the city slowly waking up beneath him. Cars, delivery trucks, people rushing to jobs that had no idea their whole industry's foundation was quietly owned by a man they'd written off a decade ago. "I'm not calling anything in," he finally said. "Not yet." "Not yet," Old Fang repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's an interesting choice of words." He didn't explain further. Some things didn't need explaining. Not to Old Fang, who'd been there from the very beginning, back when Golden Sands was one crumbling building and a stubborn refusal to give up. "There's someone I need to see today," he said instead, "in person." Old Fang's grin faded slightly. "Your father?" "Not yet," he said again. "Shang-Ching first." Old Fang let out a low whistle. "You're not done with her. She humiliated herself last night," he said calmly, "but she still doesn't understand why I let her. And until she does, this isn't finished." Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that 2 very different reckonings were about to collide before the day was over. Shen Qing's office looked different in daylight, less like a throne room, more like a woman barricaded inside her own building. She hadn't slept. The cracked phone sat charging on her desk beside 3 empty coffee cups and a stack of printed documents her assistant had gathered overnight. Everything they could find on Golden Sands ownership. None of it made sense. Every trail led to shell companies, silent partners, holding firms registered in 3 different provinces. Whoever built this empire had spent a decade making absolutely sure no one could trace it back to him.
A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Ma'am," May said carefully, stepping halfway in. "He's here." Shen Xing's spine straightened instantly. "Here? In the building?" "Downstairs. He says he'd like 5 minutes. No lawyers, no cameras." She hesitated only a second before standing. Whatever else he was, he clearly wasn't hiding anymore, and hiding from him now would only make her look weaker than she already did.
Send him up. He walked in a few minutes later, dressed simply. None of the performative shabbiness from the years before, none of the polish of last night's suit either. Just a man who no longer felt the need to prove anything through clothing. Shen King stood behind her desk, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Come to gloat?" "No," he said, taking a seat across from her without being invited. "I came to end this properly."
Yesterday wasn't meant to destroy you, Miss Shen. It was meant to get your attention. "You have it," she said flatly. "Congratulations. What do you want?" "An apology," he said simply. "Not to me. I don't need one. To Old Fang." Her brow furrowed. "Who?" 10 years ago, your family's company refused to help a man who'd stood by mine through everything right when he needed it most. You called him weak for asking. You let your people humiliate him in a meeting he still hasn't forgotten." He paused. "I remember every name on that list, Miss Shen. His was one of the first." Understanding crossed her face slowly, followed by something closer to dread. This was never about the auction. "The auction," he said calmly, "was just the introduction." She sat down slowly, the fight draining out of her posture.
What happens now? That depends on you, he said. I'm not interested in destroying your company. I've spent 10 years building something. I don't take pleasure in tearing things down for the sake of it. But loyalty matters to me, and you're going to learn to understand why, one way or another. He stood, adjusting his jacket, already moving toward the door. Fix what you broke with Old Fang, he said.
Quietly, sincerely, no cameras. Do that, and this ends here. And if I don't? He paused at the door, glancing back at her with a calm that unsettled her more than any threat could have. Then you'll learn exactly how patient I've had to be for the last 10 years. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Shen King sat alone in the silence, staring at the closed door, finally understanding that the man she'd spent a decade mocking had never once needed her attention. He'd simply been waiting to see if she deserved a second chance. Now, across the city, it was his father's turn to find out the same thing. The Fu family estate hadn't changed in 10 years. Same iron gates, same manicured hedges trimmed into perfect rows, same fountain in the courtyard that had never once been turned off, even during the years the company nearly went under. He stood outside those gates for a long moment before stepping through, memories rising uninvited. The last time he'd walked out of this house, 17 years old, carrying one bag and nothing else. The guard at the gate didn't recognize him. Why would he? 10 years and an entirely different life stood between the boy who left and the man who'd returned. I'm here to see old Master Fu, he said simply. Word must have traveled fast. Before the guard could even reach for his radio, the front door opened, and his father stood there himself. Older, grayer, but with the same sharp eyes that had once delivered a verdict that reshaped an entire life. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You came," old Master Fu finally said, voice rougher than he remembered. "You called," he replied.
Multiple times. His father's jaw tightened, the ghost of old pride flickering across his face before exhaustion won out. "Come inside." They sat in the same study where, 10 years ago, a different conversation had ended everything. The same desk, the same chair his father used to sit behind while delivering judgments no one questioned. "I owe you an explanation," old Master Fu began. "You owe me nothing," he said calmly.
I stopped waiting for explanations a long time ago. His father flinched, just slightly. I made a mistake. I was young, proud, and desperate to protect what I thought mattered. I let people convince me you were a liability instead of a son. You weren't wrong to protect the company, he said. You were wrong about who the liability actually was. Silence settled between them, heavy and unfamiliar. "Golden Sands," his father finally said.
All of it. 10 years. And I had no idea. That was the point. Old Master Fu studied him for a long moment. "What do you want from me? Revenge? The company?" "I'll admit, after last night, half the board thinks you're already planning to take it apart piece by piece." "I don't want your company," he said. "I built my own. I don't need yours." "Then what?" His father's voice cracked slightly, something rare and unguarded slipping through.
"Why come back at all, if not for that?" He considered the question carefully before answering. "I came back because hiding was never the goal. Surviving was. And now that I have, I wanted you to know exactly who you turned away. Not the boy you remember, and not the story people are telling about him this morning either." His father looked down at his hands, older and more tired than he'd ever admitted to being.
I don't expect forgiveness. Good, he said, because I'm not offering it. Not yet. He stood, buttoning his jacket, glancing once more around the study that had shaped so much of who he became, not through love, but through the absence of it. But I am willing to let you earn something smaller, a conversation, maybe eventually something closer to a relationship. That starts with honesty, not guilt. He turned toward the door.
"Golden Sands is hosting a dinner next week," he added. "Business, not family. You're welcome to attend, as a guest, not as my father. See how the rest of it plays out from there." He left without waiting for a response, the same way he'd left 10 years ago. Except this time, it wasn't an exit. It was an invitation, on his terms.
The week that followed moved faster than any of them expected. Shen Kling kept her word. Quietly, without press or performance, she reached out to Old Fang, sat across from him in a small tea house instead of a boardroom, and offered an apology that had taken her a decade too long to find. Old Fang, gracious as always, accepted it, though he made sure to remind her with a knowing smile that some debts take longer to repay than others.
"Don't worry," he told her. "He's not the type to hold a grudge forever, just long enough to make sure you meant it." She didn't ask who he was tied to anymore. She already knew. Across the city, the story of Golden Sands' true owner had settled from explosive headline into steady, simmering fascination. Analysts scrambled to reassess a decade of business decisions they'd never fully understood. Deals that once looked reckless now revealed themselves as calculated, patient, years ahead of schedule.
Investors who'd once dismissed him began requesting meetings. Old classmates who hadn't spoken to him in a decade suddenly remembered fond childhood memories that had never actually happened. It amused him more than it bothered him. He turned most of them away.
Golden Sands didn't need new money. It needed loyalty. And loyalty wasn't something people could buy their way back into after 10 years of silence.
The dinner arrived faster than anyone in the Fu family anticipated. Golden Sands rooftop venue overlooked the entire skyline, glass walls catching the last light of sunset as guests filtered in. Investors, old colleagues, a few cautious rivals testing the waters, and in a corner near the back, dressed simply and speaking to almost no one, his father. Old Master Fu had come alone, as instructed. No entourage, no leverage.
Just the man standing quietly in a room his son now owned, watching him move through the crowd with an ease that had nothing to do with the confidence he remembered from 10 years ago. The confidence forged in loneliness rather than privilege. He watched his son laugh genuinely with a business partner.
Oh, hello.
Watched him kneel down
So
to
glad you could
speak
make it.
gently with a member of the waitstaff who'd dropped a tray. Watched the quiet respect people offered him that had never once been demanded, only earned.
For the first time, old Master Fu understood the true cost of what he'd thrown away. Near the end of the evening, his son finally approached him, 2 glasses in hand, offering one silently. "You came," he said again, echoing the words from a week earlier. "I said I would." They stood together at the railing, city lights stretching endlessly beneath them, silence settling between them. Not the heavy, bitter silence of before, but something softer.
Uncertain. New. "I watched you tonight," old Master Fu finally said. "The way people speak to you. The way they trust you." He paused. "I never built that. Not once in 30 years of running my own company." "You built something else," his son said. "Fear. Obedience. It worked for a while." "It cost me you," his father said quietly. He didn't answer right away. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the noise of the city below. Car horns, distant music, the hum of a place that never really slept. "You didn't lose me because you were strict," he finally said. "You lost me because you never once asked who I actually was before deciding who I should be." His father absorbed that in silence, jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere far off in the skyline.
"I don't know how to fix 10 years, he admitted. "You don't fix it all at once," his son said. "You start with one conversation, then another. You show up, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the only proof that actually means anything." Old Master Fu nodded slowly, something in his shoulders loosening for the first time all evening. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first real step toward it.
Behind them, the party continued, unaware of the quiet negotiation happening at the railing. A negotiation with no contracts, no leverage, no option paddles. Just 2 men slowly relearning how to stand in the same room without a decade of silence between them. Near the bar, Old Fan caught his eye from across the room and raised his glass slightly, a knowing grin on his face. He returned the gesture with a small nod. 10 years ago, he'd walked out of a cold dining room with nothing but a single bag and a promise to himself that he'd never again beg for a place at a table that didn't want him. Tonight, he stood at the head of his own table, in a building he'd built from nothing, surrounded by people who respected him, not because of his last name, but despite it. Shang Cheng had learned her lesson. His father was learning his. And somewhere in the city, countless others who'd once written him off were quietly recalculating everything they thought they understood about the quiet, disgraced son of the Fu family. Let them recalculate. Let them wonder. Let them spend the next 10 years trying to catch up to a decade of patience they never saw coming. He wasn't finished. Golden Sands was only the beginning, the foundation, not the final chapter. There were more names on that list from 10 years ago. more debts left unpaid, more quiet corrections still waiting their turn. But tonight, standing at that railing with the city spread out beneath him and his father, uncertain and humbled, standing quietly by his side, tonight, he allowed himself something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because everything was resolved.
Not because 10 years of silence could be undone in a single evening, but because, for the first time since he'd walked out of that cold dining room as a boy with nothing, he finally felt like he was walking forward as exactly who he was always meant to become. And that, more than any auction, any apology, any reclaimed fortune, was the real victory.